Hello, music lovers. Thank you so much for dropping by. Thought I would talk about the 5 worst albums that Yes has ever done. And I kind of had to use a certain criteria. I had to ask the question, is this an album that I would go back and listen to? And if the answer was no, then of course that would make the list. And if the answer was yes, then it becomes how often do I go back and listen to it? How much of it will I listen to? And how good is that stuff? And so that kind of factored into the 5 that I'm going to come up with here. Okay, so number 5 on my list is Fly From Here, an album that they put out a few years back. It actually reunites the drama era lineup. That was the first time Yes ever recorded without John Anderson. They got Trevor Horn and Jeff Downes in. And so they had the same lineup for this album, except Trevor Horn was producing. At this point, they had Benoit David, who had replaced John Anderson, so they were back into another phase that they didn't have Anderson. The drama era lineup is back. They put out this album that's kind of based on a song that they actually had from the drama days. They just never did anything with it, and it actually is a pretty decent song. I don't really mind it. The problem is that after 4 minutes or so and the song is over, the rest of the album to me is just very blah and forgettable. I don't care about any of it. And it's kind of sad because there was so much potential there. Trevor Horn even recently went back and dropped his vocals in, and they put it out as a special limited edition, which is, that sounded pretty interesting. It's one of those things where, Benoit David, I thought, did a pretty damn good job. No need to really go back and do it, although I can see why. It's kind of interesting to have an alternate version of it. That's how I look at it. The problem with that album is I only like the first 6 minutes, and then the rest of it I could give a shit about. So that's not a great album. And Yes can do better than that. And I think they've done much, much better than that. So that's why Fly From Here is at number 5, okay? Number 4 on my list is going to be the Keys to Ascension studio tracks that they did back in 96 and 97. After the Rabin era kind of collapsed, John Anderson got back together with Steve Howe and Wakeman. And they, went out on tour. And this was the first time that the classic Yes lineup had been together since the early days. I mean, since now they did come back for the Union album and tour, but I'm talking about the classic lineup with Wakeman and Squire and Howe and Anderson. It was the first time that they had done anything. They had done the Anderson Brew for Wakeman Howe, but it didn't have Squire. So I'm kind of getting at the late 70s was the last time that they had done anything. And I was expecting more great stuff, but I don't know. To me, it fell short. The only song on there that I really care about is a song called Mind Drive. And even that is no big deal. It kind of had its origins from the Jimmy Page experiment that Chris Squire and Alan White got into after, actually it was before they got Trevor Rabin. It was in that between Drama and 90125 period where they worked with Jimmy Page. They called it XYZ for X, Yes, Zeppelin. And the bass line from Mind Drive, I can recall hearing in the demos that they had been working on with Jimmy Page. And the song, it just kind of goes on a bit. It kind of plods and trods and, it's got some interesting moments. But as a whole, I mean, it's nothing like Close to the Edge or anything that's great to me. And so I don't give that album very high marks. Okay, so the number 3 album is going to be the Tormato album that they put out in the late 70s. It was the last album that they did before they broke up and John Anderson left, and they went ahead and did the Drama album. And it was nothing like its predecessor, Going for the One. I mean, that was a strong album. That had a lot of great stuff on it. That's a classic Yes album. And I'm kind of hoping that they could at least put out something half as good on the follow-up. But I found that Tormato was just awful. It was almost like, okay, guys, let's just make the most annoying sounds with our instruments. And John, I want you to write like the worst crap you can possibly think of. And let's put it out there. I mean, I didn't like Steve Howe's guitar sound. Wakeman's keyboards were awful. Squire's bass was just weird. And John Anderson was coming up with just awful, like Don't Kill the Whale. It was just, never cared for that song. Future Times and the whole carnival thing with his son on the song. That's awful. The whole album's awful, except for a track called Onward, which is one that Chris Squire wrote. And it's a beautiful love song. I prefer the live version on Keys to Ascension. That has a beautiful guitar intro, and that is a really good song. Love that song. And the only other one that is of any count is on the Silent Wings of Freedom. I think that would have been a much better song had it been produced better. To me, it's just got too many annoying sounds on it, and I don't really care for it. But, you know, if I had to go back to that album, those are the two songs that I would put on. But again, overall, it's just very weak. It's not a very strong album. Number 2 is going to be Open Your Eyes, which is an album that I really don't give a shit for. It's just more of a Chris Squire, Billy Sherwood kind of thing. I believe a lot of that stuff was meant for a Billy Sherwood, Chris Squire album that never happened. And so, you know, there really wasn't much input from Steve Howe on that album. It was a very uneven album. It didn't sound like a band. It was just a very uneven album, like I said, and I rarely go back to that. I remember when I was in radio, we used to play Open Your Eyes, the title track, and it was them trying to get back to a more poppier sound like 90125, except without Trevor Rabin, and it just didn't come off good at all. Number 1 on my list has got to be the last album that they did with John Davison, who is the current Yes singer. And they went into the studio and they did this album called Heaven and Earth. And it is the most wretched shit pile I have ever heard from Yes. I don't care about anything on that album. Nothing at all. It's weak. It's very hippy-dippy and has no balls at all. It shocks me that Chris Squire let this go by. Like, how could you put this out as Yes? Knowing all the great stuff that you've put out, how do you put out this shit pile? And so, you know, that is an album that I don't even own it, let alone would I ever listen to it. There's nothing on there that I would go back and check out. And so that has to be my number 1 pick for the worst album that Yes has ever done. So what about you? What do you think about this list? And what would be your 5? What are 5 albums that you can think of that probably rank up there with the worst that Yes has ever done? I think they've put out enough of them that you could probably find out where the bottom of the barrel is and work your way up 5 and let me know what it is. Put it down in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Be sure to subscribe and I will talk to you later.